All right. Well, David, do you have a poem or
Yes, yes, I do.
please, let's begin with
And
that.
today's poem is from Macbeth. Um, Macbeth is my favorite Shakespeare play. And then recently I've discovered with Macbeth that there are 59 mentions of the word time in Macbeth. Macbeth himself says it, time thou anticipatest my dread exploits. Banquo says it, if you can look into the seas of time. And Macbeth at the very end of the play where he finds out that his wife has died. And Shakespeare's sitting in his study there with his laptop and wondering, what the heck am I going to write about this? And the phrase, the speech that he writes, I think is one of the best passages ever to strike paper. And also, without even being aware of it, he anticipated Einstein's general theory of relativity by about 300 years. So to
He
celebrate
didn't. He
that,
didn't. He didn't have Wikipedia on his laptop.
sure he did.
Oh,
Yeah, but
okay. All right.
but so I added two extra words to the speech, and here it goes. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, signifying everything. Thank you very much, Rabbi, and back to you.
Well, thank you, David. That indeed is it's a favorite passage, but indeed it's the first time I've heard of Shakespeare relying on his laptop. So okay, have to okay learn something new every week. Right.
Yeah,
Okay. Our blessing, our bracha, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. So we can't just jump into the new book of Deuteronomy. So I'm going to take the personal privilege and give a whole lot of background from a number of different perspectives before we even open the text, with the exception of one verse. Deuteronomy, of course, is the fifth of the five books of Moses, the Chamishe Chumshe Torah. The five fifths, literally, of the Torah is the way that they refer to it. And if you have a book that's only of those five books, it's referred to as the Chumash, the five books, in that sense. Uh, Deuteronomy, Devarim in Hebrew, is set apart, and we'll talk a little reason in a sense of as to why. If you remember from last week, the conclusion of Numbers really draws to a close the description of the 40 years of wandering. And while it doesn't say this is the end of our story, the assumption by many was that the fifth book, Deuteronomy, what we call Devarim, was an added reference. So the one quote that I would share early comes from Deuteronomy, verse 18. I'm sorry, chapter 17, verse 18, that Moses, and we'll go into more depth about this, but Moses is telling the people what should happen once they cross over and conquer the promised land, and once they've set up the sacred place and whatever, and that if the decision is, and it's an if the decision is that the Israelites should have a king, Moses then adds the following. This is chapter 17, verse 18. When he, meaning the king, when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah written for him on a scroll by the Levites and priests. Let it remain with him, let him read it in all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as all these laws. Okay. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows or deviate from the instruction, that's mitzvah, to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. Okay, that's what Moses tells the people, instructs the people. Nowhere does it say that Moses commands the people, that Moses tells the people, instructs them that if and when they do appoint a king, he should have a copy of the Torah written for that king by the Levites and the priests, so that they give what in the Catholic Church is known as the imprimatur. We call it the hechsher, and making it kosher, making it official. Okay, that so that will all take place, so that the king will always have with him this instruction. And Donna, here's where I get to your question. What it says that the king should have with him is a Mishneh Torah, a rewriting or a second, if you will, Mishnah, and the word shnayim or shtayim, that means two. Okay, so it's like the second Torah, or a revisiting or reviewing, a summary of however you want to translate that. But that's where that phrase comes from, right from that particular verse in Deuteronomy. Okay, all right. So the king, according to Moses's instructions, the king is instructed to have, and the way that they understood it was two copies of the Torah, to Mishneh Torah, right, a rewriting of the Torah. And I think, well, most of us are of the right generation. All of us are of the right generation, to put it this way. It probably was more of like the Reader's Digest condensed version. My mother looked forward to that when it came in the mail quarterly, right? There was the like the condensed version of 4 or 5 of the major bestsellers of the year, or something like that. So that's kind of what we imagine that the king had. There was a full copy that was made for the what should we call it, the treasury, the archives in the palace. And then there was perhaps a smaller copy, an abbreviated copy, a condensed version for him to carry with him always. Okay. And the text, although it doesn't say this in the Torah, but the text, they assume, was to be edited by the Levites and the Kohanim. Okay? Because we can't picture anybody, certainly not the king, walking around every day with a Torah scroll in his pocket. So there had to have been a smaller copy. And who did the editing? It was the Levites and the priests. So that's the way the Jewish tradition understands that particular verse and what it means. So they look at that phrase, the Mishneh Torah, the second Torah, if you will, or a rewriting of the Torah, a review of the Torah, when the Torah as we know it, the original Torah text, is translated into Greek. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. When it's translated into Greek, that phrase, Mishneh Torah, becomes translated, and I'm not a Greek scholar, as Deuteronomion, which means the second law. Okay. Then from the Greek, the Latin, that's the St. Jerome translation, which is not of the Hebrew, it's of the Latin. So in Latin, it becomes Deuteronomium. And then the English, the Old English, is translated from the Latin, from Deuteronomium into Deuteronomy. That's where we get Deuteronomy in the English, but traditionally Judaism and the Jewish texts had nothing to do with the name Deuteronomy. It's known as Devarim, like with the other four books, and like also with the names of almost all of the Torah portions. It's based on one or two of the first words in the book or the portion. So this particular book, the fifth book of the Torah, starts out Elo ha'ela ha'devarim. These are the words, or these are the things that Moses said, and that's why Devarim is the name in Hebrew. Okay. Summarily, Jewish tradition and the commentators refer to, or maybe not refer to, they kind of describe the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy or Mishneh Torah. They describe it as, when I put in my notes, I have this as a quote in quotation mark, Moses's farewell sermon and song to Israel. It's his farewell sermon and song. It's long. I mean, Michael's used to doing maybe a 45-minute to an hour performance without taking a break. The longest sermon that I've ever given in my life was 36 minutes, but Moses's runs, on and on and on and on and on and on. Okay. It divided basically into the book, not necessarily the sermon, but the book is divided basically into four sections. The first, and three of the four, Moses is speaking. The first is a warning to the Israelites of the temptations that they're going to incur when they conquer the promised land, but a promise that God will be with them, both to bless them, but also to punish them if they fall astray. Okay. Then part number two is a review and what the preachers call an exhortation. Right. It's a review of the basic laws and mitzvot. And we know, for example, that the Ten Commandments are reviewed, and many of the ethical behavior imperatives, those mitzvot are reviewed. There are some changes, and we've talked about that any number of times, but there are some changes in the way that Moses either summarize or paraphrases, I guess would be better to say, that Moses paraphrases the stories, the conditions, the experiences, and the context of which the mitzvot were given, with the assumption that in the last 39 years and 8-9 months, that the society has imposed certain changes on the way that some of the mitzvot, some of the commandments, at least on how they're understood and practiced. That might be one reason for why there are changes. Another reason why there might be changes is that Moses is getting old. He's getting to the end of his ability. We will see eventually as we read further, he's really getting burned out. And can't expect him to remember verbatim, word for word, every single quotation that God said. So unintentionally, he may have just rearranged the words or said something a little bit differently. Or again, we'll make reference to this, but some of the idioms and some of the in some of just the way that certain circumstances are described or understood by the society, by the people. And so Moses, we call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu, first and foremost. Moses is our teacher. And so in order to teach, he has to, revisit the way something might be worded. How many times in our discussions in Torah study have we questioned, and not just because we might not understand the exact meaning of the Hebrew, but we question, what does this really mean? What is this particular mitzvah? What is this particular commandment, or what I call a life sanctifying act? What is it really? What did it mean to them today, and what does it mean to us? What did it mean to them then? What does it mean to us today? And so Moses obviously was teaching that way, and had to explain to people what was originally meant and what it might mean to them once they enter the promised land, which was going to be a new experience. So, but ultimately, the bottom line, and we know this, and our tradition has maintained this for thousands of years. Ultimately, the bottom line is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay, at the foundation, the bottom line, the ultimate principle of all this, Moses is saying to the people, is remember, Adonai is our God, and then Adonai is one. That's everything comes back to that. And if you remember that, you won't go astray. Is Moses's theme. The third part of the four informal sections of Moses's speech or sermon is in the form of a song, as similarly was Jacob's, for example. In a song, and he gives his blessing to the people. And then the fourth is the long final paragraph of the entire Sefer Torah, of the entire Torah scroll, which describes the death of Moses. And when there are questions about authorship, people get into why would a compassionate God tell Moses that he should write about his own death? So tradition comes along and says, no, the last several sentences were written by Joshua and not by Moses, and whichever way that you want to approach that. Okay, so but the general approach then from tradition, as opposed to a much later critical and scholarly critical approach, but the traditional approach, when we talk of the classical commentators, the Rashis and the Maimonides and the Ibn Ezras and the Onkelos and all those, their classical understanding of the book of Deuteronomy or Devarim this is what we would call Moses's swan song. Okay, this is his, in our generation, this is his "I have a dream" speech. Okay? Martin Luther King keeps coming back to that, as an orator, keeps coming back to that phrase, "I have a dream one day." Da, 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 da. Moses keeps coming back, and we'll see this. I think it's at least, funny number, 18 times in his sermon that Moses says Shema Yisrael. He doesn't say I have a dream. He says, listen, O Israel. A reminder that that's the foundational phrase of the people. Dr. Hertz, who was has one of the commentaries that I look at in preparation for our class every week. Dr. Hertz has this quote that Moses's speech, meaning the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, Moses' speech shines as well as his face. Because if you remember it's described that when Moses comes down from the mountain with the set of the Ten Commandments, his face shined, his face shone. And okay, so Hertz uses the same phrase, that not only was it his physical face, but all the words of his concluding sermon and song shine brightly and shine forever. Okay, so that's one page of introduction that kind of summarizes, if you will, the traditional way that Mishneh Torah, or this second look of the Torah, or revision, if you will, is understood. Now, the more contemporary commentators, and by that I certainly don't mean reform or conservative or orthodox, but all those who are accepted and are quoted across the mainstream of the Jewish world. So the contemporary commentators identify three basic themes in the book of Devarim. One is that Moses is teaching, and again I refer that Moses is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses is the teacher, as opposed to earlier in the Torah, in the other books of the Torah, starting with Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. In those books, Moses is more referred to as the lawgiver, right? As the developer of the society, but here it's Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses is the teacher. Okay, so modern commentators, or more contemporary, identify three themes. One is that Moses is teaching a vigorous and clear monotheism. He knows that the people are going to continue to encounter other nations with other gods and other belief structures and patterns and rituals and practices, whatever. Moses is trying to teach them, again, the origins of and the importance of a belief in our God. Adonai Eloheinu, the new ending is plural for us. It's our God, and Adonai Echad, and it's really one with a capital Aleph. Capital one, okay? And so Moses pleads for them to have loyalty to the God of Israel, whether it sometimes is referred to as Adonai or Yahweh, to the four-letter Yud He Vav He. In some places it's referred to Elohim. If they're quoting or paraphrasing something from very early in the Israelite history, they'll use a phrase like El Shaddai, God Almighty. But Moses is teaching the people and trying to motivate them to remember their loyalty to the God of Israel. Second is that although there is a special love for Israel as the chosen people, although we don't really have that phrase, but that's the theme, that God has a special relationship, which they call a brit, a covenant, with the children of Israel. And that covenant is based on, in the second theme, is based on concept of love and justice. And then the third is that love and justice not only is for Israel, it's special, it's unique, it's kadosh when it comes to Israel, but the sense of love and justice on God's behalf is addressed to all humanity. And God is not just with the Israelites. God is the God of all. God is not just in the sacred places, or even once it's built in the temple in Jerusalem. God is omnipresent. God is everywhere. It's just that God's name and the rituals are based in the holy place, if you will. Okay. the assumption from, pardon me, the assumption from modern, not so much from the early commentators, but the assumption from modern contemporary commentators, again, across the board, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, secular, whatever, Jewish and non-Jewish, is that the book of Deuteronomy or the book of Devarim was written later. We'll talk a little bit about what later might mean, but it definitely is a later addendum, an appendix, if you will, although it's in it's in narrative form and not like a alphabetical kind of thing. And it was written later to give the emphasis that God wants a centralized worship place in the religious capital, which will wind up being Jerusalem, after the Israelites conquer the promised land. The assumption is that still, as in the wilderness, there was a wandering, and they will have, as they're conquering the promised land, they will have a holy place here, a holy place here. They'll set up an altar here. They'll set up a shrine there. They will identify what they call sacred places and high places on which, obviously the sacrifices or the smoke signals will go up. But God is saying through Moses in the later writing, God is saying that once you've established the capital, they don't call it Jerusalem yet, but once you've established the capital, then that will be the one place of worship. Other places that this develops into what we call the synagogue, other places will be places of assembly, places of prayer, but not of sacrifice. Okay. And so as a result of that expectation, or fulfilling that, if you want to see it as a commandment, as a mitzvah, then in expectation of that, other patterns of worship and religious practice start to develop, so that those people who couldn't get to Jerusalem, okay, those people who were only celebrating or observing or whatever in their hometown, in their home communities, in their home little gathering of tents, what should they do if they were no longer allowed to offer sacrifices? Because that was only going to be in Jerusalem at the temple. So there are indications in the book of Deuteronomy that they had to start preparing for and expecting this radical change in what their religious practice was going to look like. Okay. Another one is that the Moses's teaching, and this goes into direct conflict with what we saw in the book of Leviticus, for example, is that yes, there are certain things, especially once the temple is established, there are certain things that are reserved for the Levites and the priests, but the practice, I guess that's the word, the religious practice of the Israelite faith, they don't call it Judaism yet, of the Israelite faith, the religious practice was for everyone. Okay, so Moses says, Shema Yisrael, listen, all Israel, not, okay, listen, this part is for the priests, this part is for this part is for, the Mr. and Mrs. Chaim Yankel, average member of the people. Okay, it's Shema Yisrael. He says it over and over again, 18 times. Shema Yisrael, all Israel, listen to this, so that all Israel is participating. And there are things like the Torah will be read in public on regular basis. Okay, meaning that everyone is entitled to hear it. It's not just reserved for the scribes and the priests and whatever. Everyone is to listen to it. Everyone is to be taught by it. Everyone is to recite blessings. Everyone is to recite Birkat Hamazon after eating. Everyone is to say grace. Everyone is to put a mezuzah on their doorpost. All men, not just the official priests and whatever. All men are supposed to wear tefillin, to wear the head covering and between your eyes and on your hand. All men are supposed to wear fringes on their clothes, and all people. This is both men and women are to serve as role models for their children. Okay, it's not that the priest or the Levite and their lifestyle is the ultimate or the ideal. It's that every Israelite's lifestyle can be ideal to teach to their children. And everyone here, I'm sure, remembers the phrase from V'ahavta, which is the paragraph right after the Shema here in the book of Deuteronomy, Vishinantam levanecha, right? Teach them diligently to your children. Okay, the role to teach and the role and to be a role model is for everybody. It's not just for the priests and the Levites, and that is a major, major, major theme of Moses's teaching. One more that we will talk about specifically when we get to it in the text is that everyone participates in charity. Okay, we know from earlier on, we know about tzedakah as righteousness and justice, but here there's also, in this book, there's also the reference to giving charity as part of something that everyone is expected to do. Okay, that's a summary of the way that most modern contemporary commentators find the lessons of Moses in this book. Again, Moses as the teacher, the instructor, and the guide. And matter of fact, they like to use translate the word Torah as guide, not as law. Okay, all right. Then finally, I want to do a little bit about something that we've talked about in. Actually, this is not fine. This is not. This is the third of the fourth section that I want to talk to. Yeah. Yes, Michael, please.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to interrupt.
That's
Can you
okay.
hear me? Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I didn't want to interrupt, but I was just a little curious. If you can think back, just like when you started this information, and I thank you very much. It's very interesting. Uh, you mentioned something about taking a break. to, uh, and I think you referenced me. I'm not sure about. I wouldn't take a break. I would play an hour or whatever before taking.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Okay. So, do you remember the words? The exact words?
I don't remember exact words because it didn't come exactly from my notes that I have here. But I said like you get to a certain point in your music, your performance, your presentation, where you take a break, either to change the tone, or maybe not in your case with the piano, but not to retune the musical instrument or whatever. But I was making kind of the flippant comment that the longest sermon that I've ever given is 36 minutes, but here Moses' sermon is weeks, if not months long. Michael's performance, there's a certain point in time, and I just threw out an hour. I don't know.
Oh no, that's okay.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
what
just
that's what I meant. That's what I
yeah.
meant.
So just if you would just allow me to say this very quickly.
Please.
Now, it's I can go for an hour and 15 minutes without a break, but Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
My whole picture went away.
Oh, no, we're here. Can you
Well,
hear
I
me?
can't, I only can see my home page, but
Can you hear me though?
yes, I can. I
Oh, okay.
just can't see anything.
I
Uh,
can, we can see
but
you.
you can see me.
I can at least. Yes, I think so.
I can't see anything I only see my home page.
Right, maybe you had a power surge or something on
I
at
don't know.
home.
I
We
probably
don't,
have to go out and come back again. But anyway,
okay,
in my younger days, the longest I performed was 5.5 hours without a break. I just needed to say that.
even without a pitch stop, I'm impressed.
I mean, without anything, because I get into a groove. It, I still do, but then I could do it. I could actually do it. And that groove gives me the energy just to keep going. And that was when I performed for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the City of Industry at the Universal One, the Sheraton Universal One, which at that time was the largest hotel, I believe, in the state of California. But anyway, see,
Okay.
things, just one thing leads to another, and I just sometimes have to bring it out. But Rabbi, thank you very much.
No, okay, no, thanks for the comment. And that little moment gave me time to catch my breath a little bit and
Good.
take a sip of coffee and we're fine. And now I can continue. Do you have our pictures back yet, Michael?
No, I don't know. No, I have nothing. I'm just looking on my homepage, and I don't know what happened.
I
I'm
don't know,
gonna
but
have to.
we see you and hear you perfectly.
Uh, this is very strange. It's never happened. Uh, I don't know what I should do. I
Uh,
just may
I,
close the computer and try to
yeah,
come back.
that's always what they tell me to do if there's an
Okay,
issue.
so I'm gonna do that right now.
Okay,
So you'll excuse me while I'm doing
sure.
this, and I'll try to get back. Thank you
I
very
hope
much,
so.
Rabbi.
Hope we'll welcome you back. Okay. Um, the okay, so does anybody else have any comments or questions about the stuff that I've done? Yes, David, please.
Yes. Um, my question's a little off topic, but it's about the word Rabbeinu, not just teacher, but our teacher.
Yes.
Is it okay to call other people than Moses, Rabbeinu? For example, what you have just given us today, Rabbi, qualifies you to be called Rabbi Norm Rabbeinu. Is it okay to say that?
I appreciate the compliment that goes along with it, but I think technically, I mean, I don't know if it's written down anywhere, David, but technically, when you're referring to any other human being as a teacher, yes, there's the title Rav or Rabbi, but that comes like before, like doctor or professor or you know or reverend or whatever. Um, uh, but the teacher, in the way that you're referring to, and in the pattern that I'm following now, Jewish tradition and Hebrew usage, to the best of my knowledge, follows more with moreh. So they would say morenu rather than so that Rabbeinu is referred. If we're talking about Rabbeinu, we specifically know we're talking about Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu. I honestly don't know if that's written down anywhere, but that's the practice and that's the custom. So my document of what's called smicha, my ordination document that we just celebrated, it's actually 50 years ago, 50 years ago earlier this month, says Yore Yore Yadin Yadin. May he teach, and may he judge. Okay, so it gives the title Rav, all right, but Rav Yisrael, rabbi in Israel, Yora Yora Yadin Yadin. May he teach, may he teach, may he judge, may he judge.
Hmm.
Okay, that's how I would have to answer the question. But thank you for the compliment that underlies it. Okay. So we have, oh, sure, Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, just what does Shema mean, that word? Shema. Shema.
Listen.
Oh, that's what listen is.
Listen
Okay.
or hear.
Okay.
And
Then
there are all kinds of, sermonic twists and insights that go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Because there are other phrases. There's so lishmoa, the shin mem I, shma, that is the verb to hear. Okay, lishmoa. Lahakshiv is to pay attention. Lasim lev is to pay heed.
Wow.
Okay, so you have other synonyms. Okay, but and then again, through the generations, and this is something else that we'll refer to, and we all understand this, through the generations, there are different levels of interpretations that, bless you, that go along with the word. So there's a joke, at least I give the joke. Not that many people laugh at it, but I do the joke. So ma nishma, can you see me, Michael?
Yes,
Welcome
I
back.
see everybody
good.
now. Thank you.
Okay, good. So ma nishma in modern Hebrew, it's a typical greeting you see somebody on the street. Hey, how are you? And then ma nishma would be the equivalent of what's up, right? What's up? All right, what's new kind of thing. But literally it means what is heard. Ma nishma, what is heard, okay? But they use it in modern Hebrew as what's up. But when I was living in Israel, I would say, talui b'mishamah. It depends on who's listening, right? I always thought that was a cute linguistic joke, but I never got any laughs out of it. So, because whatever. Anyway, that's a sidebar, as we say. But Shema comes from the verb to hear or to listen. So, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, is the way we usually translate that phrase. Okay. All right. Now, through the last several months, if not years, people have made reference in Torah study to basically there are two approaches to the background of where the Torah came from, right? Okay. The traditional statement is that we all know it, if not by heart, but we certainly have heard it many times. God gave Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. Moses transmitted it to Joshua. This is the beginning of Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah. Joshua transmitted it to the elders of the people, the elders to the leaders of the Sanhedrin, and then it was then dispersed throughout all of the Jewish people. Okay? That was the transmission of Torah, the authority of Torah, the authenticity of Torah, and the authorship of Torah. God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. Now, whether that means, however you want to interpret gave, that God dictated and Moses wrote, God gave it in a prepared and completed fashion, God inspired Moses to write it over the next 40 years or 39 years and 8 months, however you want to, but that the authority and the authenticity and the authorship come from God. That's the traditional statement. Where does Torah come from? Comes from God. however you then, however you want to interpret the process, okay, of it being given to Moses and then to all of us, okay. The other, and these are, I'm just summarizing the two opposite ends of the extreme ends of the spectrum. The other is that the Torah, at least as we have it, after several, if not hundreds, but if not thousands of years of being transmitted orally, that God may have given the Torah to Moses, but it wasn't written down. It was transmitted orally, and then orally Moses gave it to Joshua and to the people, and da 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 da. And as we know from playing that simple game telephone, that if I say something to Bev, and then Bev says something to Les, and then Les says something to David, and then David says, and whatever, and as it goes around, even unintentional. I mean, yeah, there may be some wise guy who's going to intentionally change it, but usually it's an unintentional. Wait, what did he say? Oh, I missed it. I think he said such and such. So that's what I'm going to tell the next person. And by the time it gets through 20 people, much less generations, there's been some change. So recognizing that there were hundreds, if not 1,000 years of oral history, and then at a certain point, a group of people, we call them the Masoretes, which is just it's a word that it's a playoff on the word tradition, the traditionalists, that they sat down and they came up with a particular version saying, this shall be the version of the Torah. And they resolved all of the questions and all the discrepancies and the spelling errors and whatever. And then it goes on from there. Or there are those who say, as of a certain point of time, and it probably relates to just before and just after the conquest of the northern 10 tribes in the kingdom, 722 BCE, that different groups in different geographic and even chronological times, that they wrote what they knew was their Torah based on what they had heard for 1,000 years or whatever. They wrote it down, and then it continued through their own tribes or their own communities until the Masoretes put it all together. Understanding that last outline is what the scholars and the scientists today call documentary hypothesis. Comes out of Germany in the 19th century in a school of biblical criticism called the Wissenschaft des Judentums, the scientific study of Judaism. And the primary teacher was a guy named Wellhausen. I forgot his first name. Wellhausen, Wellhausen. We had to study all this in seminary, obviously. And Wellhausen and his school of thought identified, and we've referred to these every once in a while, and Rabbi Miri talks about it from Friedman's book and stuff, is the J source, the E source, the P source, and the D source. And I'll do a little summary of each of those in a moment. But picture it in the following way. Okay, let's take. I don't want to do anything necessarily political, because that'll really take us astray. But let's take an event of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Okay. Now, there were only a certain number of newspaper people who were there, who could write down verbatim what President Lincoln said. There were others who later on were able to have access to what's the story that he wrote it on a napkin or an envelope or something like that, right? But it certainly wasn't on a on a transcribed text for him to read. Okay, but there are all kinds of, hang on, it says my battery's running low. Hold on one second. There we go. Um,
Hello? Hello?
I think we lost the rabbi for a minute, so we're going to
Yeah.
take a little break till he gets back.
Yeah, thank you. I can stretch.
Well,
It's okay, he'll be back.
He'll be back. His
It's not-
lecture is
it's not-
very interesting, I think.
it's it's nice to see Bev Lake. Hi, Bev. So you're still here?
Oh, I thought you were
Well,
gone.
The last time I heard that you were moving to England. What happened?
No, I wasn't moving to England. We were going up north.
Oh, okay,
We're not yet. I have,
okay. Misunderstood. Anyway, it's good to see you there.
Yeah, I thought, my goodness, those paintings, those pictures are
They
the
look
same
so
as
much
her.
like they were, like my old ones. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like you really like those. You travel with them. Yeah.
Well, this is a really large motorhome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I should show
That's
you.
how we travel.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, Rabbi. Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure. I'm like Michael. I'm not sure what's happening today. You can hear me and see me all right?
Yes,
Okay. All right.
yes.
Um, uh, so, okay. So Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So there probably were a couple people who were there as eyewitnesses and were able to transcribe, because it's not a long speech. They were able to transcribe it. There are others who maybe a day or two later were able to see a copy of the text. Then there are others, and I'm talking about newspaper people, journalists. They didn't have television or cable news. And then there are a couple other people who, a week later, after the trains and everything got back from Gettysburg, got back to Chicago or to Norfolk or to Washington or New York or Birmingham or wherever, that they wrote down what they remembered, or the little handwritten notes that they might have had, and wait, what is that word? Is that, what is that word? I don't remember exactly what he said. I think he said something. So if we can imagine that that's the way that an event was recorded, when only certain people, if anybody, were there as eyewitnesses, it may have been 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 years later that the writers are going back and revisiting that event based on what they heard, or what their mama or the local storyteller told them, or whatever, and they're rewriting it as if it's, excuse my phrasing, the gospel truth. Now, gospel, the phrase gospel really is a Hebrew phrase, besarot tovot. It means good news. Godspell, good means good news, and not God as in God, good news. Okay, so these editors or these journalists or these writers or whatever are writing based on what they heard was the story, with their, again, I'm choosing the word in a very technical sense, with their biases. Their bias meaning what they felt, somebody who was from the North and pro Lincoln and you know and anti-slavery, they're going to have one way of writing about Lincoln's speech. Somebody else from the South is going to have a different way of writing about Lincoln's speech. Somebody whose best friend died in that battle may choose different words to write about Lincoln's speech. Someone who survived the battle may have other ways. So do you get my point? So what the scholars have said, the critical scholars have said, whether we agree with it or not, and it may, I'm oversimplifying it, but what they've said is we have to recognize in looking at some of the text, if not all of the Torah text, we have to recognize that the author, or better, the editor, the one who edited all of these stories and all of these accounts, the one who edited and decided, well, this stays in, this comes out. We're going to change this word. We're going to make this from singular into plural. We're going to make this, it sounds a little bit better, a little more palatable to people. Here's a word that we just don't understand what it meant. It meant something in context thousands of years ago, but we don't know it anymore. So let's use a more relative or more relevant word to describe what we think Moses was trying to say, for example. And those primarily 4 different editorial boards, let's call them that. Okay, 4 different groups of scholars, translators, writers, some of them being more poetic, some of them being more historian, that each of them took a crack at the stories, the legends, whatever that were being handed down. And that was compiled into what we would today call an anthology. So there are those scholars today who would say that the Torah is an anthology of all of these different, not fictional, but all of these different collected stories that from in one geographical area, it may have meant this, in a different geographical area may have meant that. In a different time period, it may have meant one thing. Another different time period may have meant something else. If it was written down when the Jews, the Israelites, had a positive relationship with the Moabites, it may have been written one way. At another point in time, another group of Israelites may have had very negative experience with the Moabites. And in their writing of the story, they may have written it with a different bias and a different purpose, depending on who they were writing for, depending on who and where their information came from, and whatever. Again, we can accept or we can reject that theory. But that, Michael, I'll get to you in 1 second. But we can accept or we can reject that theory. But that's the way that more modern, let's say, since the mid-19th century, more modern scholars, and not in a negative way, but more modern critics of biblical understanding would look at the text. So they would say there are these 4 major editorial boards, or 4 major groups, and we know them. We call them the J source, the E source, the P source, and the D source. And I'll give a couple little more comments about those and where they're kind of placed on the geographical and the historical timeline. And then we'll see if we can go ahead and start with the text. Yes, Michael, please.
With all this time that's passed by, the bottom line, the way I see it, it cannot be disproven. You cannot disprove anything. One can come up with scenarios and different ideas about it, but once it's written down and passed down all these years, I take it for what it is. I think it's all accurate.
You mean
Because-
in the Torah, in the text of the Torah?
Yes.
That's what you're talking
because-
about. Yes,
Yeah,
right.
because
right.
I cannot disprove it.
Exactly.
That's the key, I think. The key element is truth, one way or the other.
Right, right. And I don't mean to imply, when I use the word criticism, which is not, when they talk of biblical criticism, and
Yeah.
that's not my term, that's the technical term.
I
for the-
understand
for the
that.
scholarship. It's not, the intent was not to disprove. The intent really, because the people who were developing it were very, very devout and strong believers. Their intent was not to disprove. Their intent was to find a way to understand, if you will, explain perhaps, but to understand the fact.
Validated.
I'm sorry?
Validated.
Well, to validate, yeah, but when there are contradictions or when there are changes or when there are grammatical mistakes or something like that, how do we understand? Because by definition, we believe in a God who doesn't make mistakes. So the mistake must have been human. Can we kind of figure out where and why the mistake? Was it accidental? Was it intentional? Did they change a particular wording because they were concerned that the Greeks or the Assyrians or the Babylonians were going to do something to them if they found such and such a text? That's what the criticism means. It's not to disprove. You're absolutely right. There's nothing there in the tradition that would disprove any of it. The intent was, traditional Judaism basically says, this is our truth and we believe it. The biblical criticism and the more modern would say, we accept this as our truth. We want to be able to believe it more firmly. We want to be able to believe it more in our own generational understanding, in our own perspective and context. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
One thing.
Yeah.
This is a little side thing, but what I heard or read is that the term "amen" is actually from
I
the
believe.
Hebrew,
Right.
and everybody today uses it. Everybody, and this is from our Hebrew. Is that
Exactly.
correct?
Amen and it's the source. It's the source of the noun is emunah. Okay. The verb is ma'amin. So there's the phrase that came out of Maimonides that was used so much in the Holocaust is anima amin be'emunah shlema. I believe with perfect faith. And yes, and it's almost like an abbreviation, or every time you say amen is saying I believe. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, as opposed to people who think that it means the end. It doesn't. It means I believe. It's affirming what was just said previously.
Makes sense.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So I mentioned before that the text that we have, and we just had a new Torah text that was written, for the temple last year, and whatever. That primarily the text as which we have it it's a little more than 1,000 years ago, agreed upon by this amorphous group called the Masoretes. It's not like somebody had to show a particular, CV and resume to be able to join the Masoretes. But there was a general acceptance that these traditionalists, these scholars, these experts, these will be the one they'll meet for whatever it was for a year, whatever. And the text, there's a universal agreement that the text that they came up with would be the standard text of the Torah, even though they acknowledge that there are spelling mistakes, but they couldn't reach agreement on whether to correct the mistake. Okay. And of course, it means something totally different in our day and age, in the 21st century, to notice that in a couple occasions, God is referred to with the feminine pronoun she. Okay. Now, 1,000 years ago, the rabbis would have never agreed that there was a feminine aspect to God. Today, there are those who more comfortably talk about that. And so the fact that the pronoun can be written as he rather than who is okay. 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, it probably was a problem for some, difficult for some. And yes, someone had to make the distinction. Do we correct that spelling mistake or do we leave it be? All right. And actually the Torah text that we have is not, coincidentally, is not based on the earliest available text of the Hebrew Bible. This is coincidence and it's curious, okay? We have earlier texts from earlier than 1,000, 1,200 years ago, before the Masoretes. We have earlier texts, but there's much more contradiction and disagreement about some major things that are in there. Whereas the Masoretic text was able to bring and reconcile some of the differences, but some of the older texts that are referred to, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are much older than the Masoretic text, lead us in a different direction. And that's a whole other thing for some other scholar and students rather than myself to talk about. There's also the text that the Hebrew, that our Hebrew is somewhat based on, or at least let's say that it was checked with. And that's a translation into Greek that you may have heard of that's called the Septuagint. Okay. Septuagint, it refers to 70. There was this.
Excuse me, Rabbi, I've got to take my eyes. I had a
Okay,
lot of
Mike.
problems. I'm going to take a break, okay?
Okay, all right. We'll see you when you get back. Okay. The Septuagint, there's this legend that 70 Greek scholars who also knew Hebrew, that they were chosen by some Caesar or king or whatever, and placed, they were each given a copy of the Hebrew text, and they were placed like in caves or whatever, and brought food and water on a regular basis. And after a certain date, 6 months, whatever it was, they all came out, and miraculously, they all had exactly word for word the same translation into Greek from the Hebrew. Okay, the Hebrew text that they were using. Okay. That's one of the texts that gets us into difficulty, for example, with translations of words that go from Hebrew to Greek, and then from Greek to Latin, and then from Latin into English. But the Septuagint, that translation into Greek, is what everything was then based on for 600, 700, 800 years. It was based on the Greek rather than on the Hebrew, because the Hebrew texts that we had from that 700-800 year period, there was not one singular accepted Hebrew text. There were different texts, okay, with different, like I say, contradictions or this or that, but so the only one that was consistent was the Greek. Then that's another reason why the Masoretes were brought together to make the one authoritative Hebrew collection. Okay? All right. let's see. So I mentioned that, so the Masoretes took it all. Okay, all right. So the assumption is, well, I shouldn't say assumption. What scholars basically claim is that all of the stories, the sermons, the incidents, the mitzvot, the text, everything were written down in one form or another eventually by the year 400 BCE. Okay. And now we don't have the way that it was written down that way, but that's kind of a target date that they say it seems like that we had written down texts, obviously covering much of the material that goes back to 1200 or so BCE, and before that it's definitely all oral history and whatever. But what we have as of 400 BCE reflects different language. Again, whether or not we all speak English, but if you try to talk English with somebody from the deep South, their language is a little bit different than somebody who comes from Boston. Okay, and on and on and on and on and on. And then, of course, you throw in people like David Levy, who's English and French, okay,
Or from people from Arkansas.
or from Arkansas, right? Okay, and then the nasal people from the Midwest. So whatever. So the same. We can't assume that that's just a United States of America or a North America phenomenon. That probably happened a long time ago too. There were geographical differences, there were ideological differences, and all kinds of language nuance, and we joke about that. Continuously. So it was in the 19th century, mid 19th century, that this what the scholars call this documentary hypothesis tried to identify. There were four different sources of documents that are brought together. Again, and Michael's not here, but not to criticize, not to deny the authority or the authenticity or the truth of the Torah, but to try to make it more believable from a standpoint of perspective and context. Okay, the oldest source seems to be the E source, and we get the letter E because it relates not only to E for Elohim, which is actually an aleph, but they were writing in English and German. So the E source for Elohim, which was one of the names for God, or Elohim or Eloheinu, and that's similar in the other Semitic languages. From Allah begins with the guttural sound, or okay, but it also probably, they say, began in the geographic area of the tribe of Ephraim, which also begins with an E or an aleph. So they make that connection too. For those who don't want to see the E as representing Elohim, they say, it comes from Ephraim, and it predates that's in the north, so it predates the Assyrian conquest, which is 722 BCE, because they can identify the area of Ephraim, whereas once the Assyrians conquered the north in 722, we can't identify the Ephraim anymore. So that's the E source. The J source comes next. The J, because they didn't do it as Y, but J for Jehovah. It's actually a Yud in Hebrew, but actually it's not only for Jehovah or Yehovah, it's also for Yehuda or Judah, because this represented the largest geographical area and the most populous most populous of the tribal areas, which was Judah, which is in the south. And so the debates as to which came earlier, but there are enough references in the J source to assume that they knew about the north being conquered by the Assyrians. Okay. Again, there's debate. I mean, one of my professors was specifically thought it was the other way around. Thought that Judah was the earlier source and was only warning the Ephraim people of an imminent threat from further north from the Assyrians. But most of the scholars say that he came first. Okay. Then there's the P source, and that's, as we know, that P is for priests. So that's primarily the book of Leviticus, of the Levites and the priests. They probably several hundred years later than the others, and it may even be as late as Babylonian exile, which would put it into the 5th century BCE. And because they didn't know if they were going back to the promised land. So there's much more emphasis on the role of the priests and the Levites and how they had to maintain the sacrificial cult rather than what was going to happen when they returned to the promised land, because they weren't all confident that they were going to return and inherit. Then the latest source is the D source, referring to Deuteronomy, which is going to lead into the stories that tell us exactly where we are for today, which they date probably in the late 6th century BCE, and is a summary and a reinterpretation of everything that had happened before. So those are the four, the J, E, whichever order you put them in, J, E, P, and D. Each with its own, again, we use the term intentionally, each with its own bias, of the sense of who was writing, why they were writing, who they were writing for, and what their particular agenda was in writing the way that they did. Okay, all right. Okay, so all of that background, then here's just the simplest explanation or background for the book of Deuteronomy, or of Devarim, as we call it in Hebrew. As I mentioned earlier on, at the very beginning, there's this quote in chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, that the king should have a copy of a Mishneh Torah, a copy of, or a second Torah, available to him wherever he might be. So one story, as it appears in the book of 2 Kings, chapters 22 and 23, is that a king named Josiah, not Hosea, but Josiah. And again, we write it with a J, but it's actually with a Yud in Hebrew, Yoshiah. Okay, comes from the same Hebrew root as Joshua, incidentally, who was 640 to 608 BCE, for those who like to have the exact historical reference, 640 to 608 BCE. Okay, that Josiah wanted to impose a radical religious reformation. Now, what's going on here? Okay, 586 is the Babylonian exile. 586 is when Babylon conquers Jerusalem and the south, right? So by that time, the entire Israelite nation, although there are some families that were able to survive, but the entire Israelite nation, the Bnei Israel, are dispersed. Okay. But King Cyrus Persia conquers Babylon and allows them to return to, or allows those who want to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. There are those who stay in Babylon, which is now renamed Persia, right? And the capital of which is Shushan or Susa. And that becomes the people of the story of Esther. But the ones who return to Jerusalem, okay, so King Josiah, who's not the first king upon the return, but he wants to really revolutionize the Israelite, the worship and the peoplehood and whatever. He wants to centralize everything as much as possible in Jerusalem instead of the high places that have been identified back from the days of the Torah when there wasn't a temple in Jerusalem. And so since right now there isn't one because it had been destroyed by the Babylonians. So Josiah starts talking in terms of that, yes, you can only have, now when we rebuild, you can only have worship in Jerusalem. And he institutes what some other changes, the most famous of which is that Passover, remember, okay, Passover should no longer be a home festival. Previously, Passover was something that you did at home. Even, and I'm not talking about 21st century, I'm talking about thousands of years ago. Passover was a home festival, the Higadat HaLevincha. You read the Haggadah, you do all these things. You eat the matzah, you taste the maror, and those are all home observances. Okay, but Josiah turned Passover into a pilgrimage festival like Sukkot and like Shavuot, which is what we're happening tomorrow night. Okay, that was to be experienced in Jerusalem, not exclusively at home. Okay, and that as many people as possible needed to come to Jerusalem, male, female, children, whatever. Okay, so he calls the people to everybody to come to Jerusalem and pledge loyalty to God, parallel to the story that is reenacted, and David and I were joking about it earlier, the reenactment of Mount Sinai. And Josiah has as many people as possible come to Jerusalem to stand at the base, not of Mount Sinai, but of Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount. That's where the temple is built. That's where Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac. And Josiah has the people pledge loyalty, just like Moses asked the people at Mount Sinai, again, the story that we retell on Shavuot, do you pledge your loyalty to God? And the people answer, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do as we will hear. There's that word shema again, Donna. Okay, all right. So Josiah has this same kind of reenactment to make loyalty and pledge and allegiance at the temple in Jerusalem the same way that the earlier generations 1,000 years ago had done at Sinai. Okay. And as part of this ceremony or ritual, they read from what's called the Book of Teaching, Sefer HaTorah. Okay. Now, whether that's the entire 5 books, the way we have it, or whether it's only the Reader's Digest condensed version that I was talking about that the king carried in his pocket, we don't know. But this notion of a public reading for everyone to hear, that the Torah wasn't just for the scribes and royalty and the priesthood. Okay, it is possible that, and again, there are some scholars, and I'm not that kind of a historical a student or a scholar of the history. There are some who say that whole ritual on a smaller level may have taken place already during the reign of one of Josiah's predecessors. That's Hezekiah, and who was the king of Judah immediately after the fall of the northern kingdom. So they're not really sure of So again, it may. Again, one of my professors put it in this context of said Hezekiah was the one who had established this thing of that everyone needs to come, whether it's for a census or whether it's just to have this reenactment and make all the people a feel-good moment. Okay, especially in light of the fact that the northern kingdom had been destroyed. Okay, so we need to rally round. We need to get everybody together and have a big, yay Israel kind of, yay Judah kind of celebration. And if he did that and started and read the book of the Torah, the book of the teaching, and Josiah knew of this, and he said, it was a little long having to read the entire thing. So let's have this Reader's Digest condensed version that we can read, and that's the book of Deuteronomy. That's the book of Devarim, which basically has the summation of the history, the summary, and the clarification of most of the mitzvot that are for the people to do, as opposed to for what the priests and the Levites are supposed to do. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my mind was thinking that allowing not only the priests and the Levites to be in control of basically be in control of the laws, and they're the ones that you look up to, almost as if they're a spokesman for God, I guess, but they're almost in that position of a God too, in a way. But this allowing the Israelites and then later on the Jews the true freedom of having that with them, not having to hear it from someone else, coming down. Isn't that seems to me like that is the ultimate freedom, to be able to have that for yourself, for your family, for your community. And then it's there. You don't have to go somewhere else. You're unable maybe to, like you said, to go to Jerusalem. And
it's that it's democratic. It's that this is and that's, I mean, I made that joke before about what Rabbi Laura Geller said when she invited. She said, "Well, we'll see you all at Sinai on Sunday night." Okay, I mean, the quotation from, and it's in the book of Deuteronomy. It's in Devarim. We read it on not only on the weekly Torah portion, but we read it on Yom Kippur. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. All of you are standing this day. All of you are here participating. All of you are witnessing. It's a feel-good moment. It's a challenge, and it's an admonition, but it's an affirmation that everyone is here.
yeah,
From the lowliest to the highest, from the king to the pauper.
and it also seems then that it would be, once it is for me and for everyone, then I have a bigger responsibility to those teachings. There's a bigger responsibility then of following or not following. I don't know. So I think that's good too. That's another
Yeah,
form
well,
of freedom.
that's the debate. I don't know if you were here
Oh,
when this group, for example, because it must have been a couple of years ago, but
no.
when this group addressed what the Israelites respond to Moses at Mount Sinai,
Hmm.
when they say Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. Notice which is coming first. That we agree to do all this, you know, as we hear it,
Oh,
as we absorb it, as we understand. But we're gonna do it first before we even grasp it.
yes.
Okay,
That's
so there's got to be an
on
affirmation
faith.
of
Yeah.
that this is what's expected of you. This is what your ancestors committed you to,
Mhm.
and then of course the teaching is that the more that you do it, the more you'll come to understand and
Yay.
appreciate what the meaning, what the
Yeah.
meaning is. Right.
Yeah. And that's within any angle of life,
Yeah.
the fake it till you make it kind of a thing. So anyway, thank you.
So when you started off speaking about how whether people could approach the holy person or not, the sacred, the priest. So I will never forget, and this is more than 50 years ago. So um, I was a newly ordained rabbi, so definitely more than 50 years ago. Pardon me if this is a little off color, not much, but a little. And I was at the temple building of the congregation that I was serving as assistant rabbi, and and I was standing at the urinal in the men's room, and a little boy must have been like in second grade or third grade walked in and saw me standing there and literally went like, oh no. Turn around. He just couldn't conceive that a rabbi was going to need to go to the bathroom and relieve himself.
Yeah.
Rabbis are not human, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there certainly was that in not just in biblical times, the notion that someone who was closer to God.
Right.
Right. Right. So anyway, let's do a little. I don't know. I guess we lost David. I'm not sure. Should we start with the text, or should we wait till next week to start with the text? It's like what? It's like 20 to 12.
Yeah, my mind is full now. It would be,
Filled you up, huh?
yeah, it would be like taken away. I need to digest what was said today and then start. This is me, and then start afresh next Saturday.
Okay.
Who else? Bev? Michael?
Are we okay with then hitting the pause button right now then for the day,
Yeah.
and we'll start with the text next week.
It's for me, that's fine
Okay.
Okay.
because
Okay.
you did a lot of you
It was a lot. It's a lot
disseminated
of information
Yeah.
a lot of information
right,
and
and perspective.
you
Yeah.
know uh, I have to say this if I may. You brought out a lot of things here which kind of connected me with what is happening in Israel for the past year or two. Certain things that um, I think is worth a discussion at some point in time.
Yeah.
But why Israel reacts the way they do, and with certain, yeah, it's and I couldn't talk about. I could talk about it now, but it would lead
No, I
into a
think
lot of.
right. It does warrant a separate opportunity for everybody to share not only factual but also emotional
Yeah.
reactions. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Okay, folks, then I will wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And Chag Sameach,
Sameach.
and we will see you again soon.
Bye, Bev. Bye,
Okay.
Michael.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah.